I'm at Maple Street Diner in Columbus, nursing a black coffee when my brother's text lands. Money's tight. Gotta cancel the Smokies weekend. I swallow the yes I've said my whole life. Before the cup touches the saucer, my phone pings again. Bank alert. Your card was charged $2,947.18 by Aspen Ridge Lodge. Deluxe suite, ski rentals, 4 lift tickets, guest names, Darren, his wife, their kids. Card on file, L. Whitaker, ending in 1442. My heart doesn't pound in my chest, it pounds in my hands, the same hands that pay for everything. I look at the receipt, then at the gray Ohio morning, and something in me finally clicks shut. I type 4 words I've never sent before. Find your own wallet. The calls start. 17 before noon. I let them ring. I leave cash for the coffee and step into a different life, one where family isn't a password to my money. Today, I stop being someone's emergency fund. Today, I cut access, not corners. And when he shows up at my door in a ski lodge hoodie to charm his way back in, you'll hear exactly what I say. I drove straight to the Mid-Ohio Teachers Credit Union and sat down in front of Ms. Alvarez, who wears a tight bun and red lipstick and makes you feel like an adult student who can still master something hard. She waved me into a chair. "What can we do for you, Ms. Whitaker?" I need to remove an authorized user, and I want to stop every auto transfer that feeds that account, and anything that has his name on it needs to be a no-go today. She didn't ask if I was sure, like I might need to think it over with a cup of tea. She pulled up my profile and clicked through screens with a crisp patience. "I can order a new card for you right now instead of fraud alert for any transaction over $200. I can also add a note to flag any large travel-related charge." Yes. I handed her the Aspen receipt I'd printed on the library copier, the kind of paper that still curls from the heat. She ran her finger over the total and said, "We'll take care of this." When she brought out the card cutter and slid Darren's plastic through its mouth, the little crunch it made felt like a door closing behind me in a room where the windows had been stuck for years, where the air was stale and you convinced yourself it was fine. The sound wasn't loud. It was final. I thanked her and walked 2 blocks to the Franklin County Courthouse. The sky had a thin, pale sun in it that made everything look honest. The clerk at the information desk had a coffee mug that said, "World's Okayest Clerk," and I wanted to hug her for it. I told her I was looking for a senior legal clinic, something free where someone could talk me through what else I should be thinking about, because sometimes besides money, there are papers and signatures, and the way they stack matters. She slid a trifold flyer across the counter. "St. Rita's in the basement, Thursdays at 2. They're good folks. They'll tell you what's worth doing and what's not." I folded the flyer and tucked it with my bank papers. My hand shook when I pushed the courthouse door open to head back outside. This time wasn't fear. It was a kind of tremor that shows up when your body starts to believe your mind. We're doing this. We're leaving. We're not going back. By the time I got home, the text had gone from urgent to indignant. Jody's came in late afternoon, so long it covered the screen and needed a scroll. "Misunderstanding. We were going to surprise the kids with the trip and then surprise you after. Darren meant to call you sooner. Aspen was a gift from my boss. You can't do this to family." I deleted it. I took ground beef out of the freezer and made meatloaf and mashed potatoes and ate at the kitchen table with the good plate I used to save for company that often didn't stay long. I ate every bite, slowly, like practicing faith. By morning, the doorbell was ringing. I didn't have to check the peephole to know it was Darren. He has a doorbell personality, half bounce, half claim. I opened the inner door but left the storm door closed. He stood there in his ski lodge hoodie with a tan you don't get from Ohio sun, jaw tight, hands up like he was innocent and holding nothing as proof. "This is crazy, Lynn. You know I always pay you back." "No," I said, calm like the edge of a pond. "You always promised to." He laughed a little. False. It was just the Aspen thing. We'll fix it after the holidays. You canceled my weekend for it and lied to my face about why. He blinked and tilted his head that way when he wants me to come back to the old script where I say he's right because he trusts me to be reasonable. Come on, you don't even like cold. And I like spending money that isn't yours. His mouth twitched. We're family, he said, leaning on the word like it could hold both of us. You're going to end up alone if you keep this up. I've been alone. What I won't be is used. He stepped closer. I didn't move. Across the street, sweet, sturdy Maggie Cole, my neighbor, 72, retired paramedic, the kind of woman who keeps jumper cables in her trunk and a spare casserole in her freezer, walked out to her mailbox in her wool coat and waved. She looked like coincidence. She was not. I had texted her, if he shows up, stand visible. There are kinds of safety that come in pairs. Sometimes it's another woman's silhouette. This isn't finished, he said, and for the first time I saw his anger like steam cold enough to hurt. It is for me. I closed the storm door. I clicked the locks. I stood with my forehead against the wood and counted 12 slow breaths, and then sat on the edge of the bed and let the tears arrive the way weather happens on a map, inevitable, moving through. Grief found me again right then. Years late and perfectly on time. I thought of Tom and the day they wheeled him on the hospital bed to a room I wasn't allowed in. I thought of the quiet after, the noises refrigerators make and how they sound like someone trying not to cry in the next room. I thought of Darren moving boxes in and out of my garage and saying, "Don't you worry, I'll handle the hard stuff," and how good it felt to be handled when you were crumpled into a shape you no longer recognize. After Tom died, Darren had said, "Let me help with the bills until you're steady." He set up online banking and added himself as an authorized user for emergencies, and I told myself it was a bridge. Bridges can take you places, and they can be a promise to stay. The first time he used the card, he bought 4 tires and texted a photo of the receipt with the caption, "Family discount." The second time, it was a quick water heater fix. The third time, it was club soccer gear for CJ, expensive cleats and a team warm-up that made him look like the pros in a picture I still have. By then, it was easy to say yes because my sister-in-law had perfected the small remark that does the work of asking without using a single question mark. "Oh, we'll skip Brooklyn's field trip," Jody would say, lifting a shoulder like she didn't mind. "No biggie. Not everyone gets to do everything." I learned to hear the sentence inside the sentence. Some people get to do it because of you. We weren't children anymore, but we slid back into our parts like winter coats. Darren was the boy who'd argued his way into 1 more quarter for the arcade machine and charmed Mrs. Hastings into letting him skip detention. I was the girl who mended the knees of our jeans and told the truth when our mother asked who broke the plate. We thought we graduated out of those roles and kept playing them anyway. The Thursday after Aspen, I walked down the steps to the basement of St. Rita's Church. The senior legal clinic set up folding tables under fluttering paper snowflakes. A knot of women sat with manila folders in their laps like they were at an altar of regular life. A volunteer in a brown blazer motioned me to the end of a table and asked me to tell him what was going on. He had a face you could practice the truth on. I told him about the card, the promise of emergencies, the steady drip of "we'll square it up when my bonus hits" that never did, and the way the Aspen receipt hit me like proof I could show to a judge or myself. He said, "We're going to make a boring list," opening a new legal pad. Boring wins these fights. I smiled at that. He wrote numbers down the side of the page with his square, careful handwriting. 1. Close any shared accounts, which I had. 2. Remove every authorized user and change every password, which I had started. 3. Put a freeze on my credit with all 3 bureaus in case someone got creative. 4. Make a list of every auto pay Darren had set up and move it back where it belonged. 5, keep a file with receipts and notes, dates, times, who said what, not because I wanted to go to court, but because truth looks different when it has a timeline. 6, tell at least 2 people in my life what I'd done and why, because secrecy is a thief's best friend. Do I need a restraining order? I asked, my voice as small as it gets when you are ashamed of your own fear. He said, if you feel unsafe, but if it's financial coercion without direct threats, your best move can be a paper fence. No shared leverage, no access, lots of daylight. Daylight, I repeated like it might be a place you could move into. Daylight, he said, and ripped the page neatly off for me to take home. When I got back, Maggie showed up with 2 mugs of sweet tea and a store-bought blueberry pie she said she'd baked, and I didn't correct her. She sat on the couch and announced, "Line dancing at the community center, Tuesdays at 6, you're coming." I have 2 left feet, which was true, though I thought of my feet more as kind than left. They had carried me through all the houses of my life and still knew the way to the good chair without turning on lights. She said, then you have 1 for each beat. Bring your sense of humor and flats. The Aspen charge posted on my card. Ms. Alvarez had warned me it might be more trouble to contest it this cycle and shut the gate so the cow can't keep getting out. I stood at the sink and thought I would not have chosen the cow metaphor, but I was not a banker and people earn their figures of speech. I paid the bill. It felt like buying the right to stop. The next morning, I pulled the St. Rita's list from my folder and started checking boxes. Passwords, auto pays. I set up text alerts for charges and laughed a little at my own late confidence. The laughter surprised me. Laughter is one of those birds that leave for months and then come back like they never went away. Something else surprised me that week. A contentment I'd felt exactly twice since Tom died. Once when I regrouted the bathroom tile by myself and stood on the bath mat to admire the straight lines, and once when I loosened the lawnmower blade and changed it without shredding my fingers, which should be a merit badge for anyone over 60. It would have been enough to sit inside that quiet. But another voice I barely recognized whispered, "Take a trip." Not Aspen. Definitely not Aspen. Not to prove I could or to make a point. Just to go somewhere my money had never been anything but mine. The AAA office off the interstate has a fish tank and 2 fake palms and a calendar of road trips across America, which makes you feel like there is still a country to be had if you have a map and gas money. A girl who could have been the same age as my granddaughter sat me at a desk with her nameplate crooked and asked where I wanted to go. New Mexico, I heard myself say. Santa Fe. I want art and spicy food and sky. She clicked and nodded and gave me options. I picked a Rhodes Scholar tour with words like folk art market and Adobe architecture and Georgia O'Keeffe. 10 days. January prices, a hotel with complimentary breakfast that promised green chili stew and a photo so beautiful I could taste it. You want to think about it? She asked, the way people do when they're selling you something you never let yourself want. I've been thinking for 40 years, I said. Book it. The day I told Maggie, she yelled like she found a 20 in her winter coat and danced in my tiny kitchen. "You'll bring me back a something," she said. "Doesn't have to be an object. Bring me back a story." If you have never packed a suitcase for yourself after years of packing for other people's emergencies, it's like cleaning a junk drawer and finding one thing that belongs there and then realizing it was always the only thing that mattered. I packed comfortably, kindly. I put in a sweater Tom used to call my mustard one because it made me look like a warning sign at twilight. I liked it because it made me visible. I thought of Darren once on the plane when the engine roared and the man across the aisle fell asleep open-mouthed, but I thought of him like traffic I had chosen to let pass before I crossed. The flight attendant asked if I wanted a biscuit.
I took 2, because once in a while you get to be your own mother. Santa Fe looked like a painting had decided to get up and go outside. The sky was the heartbreak kind of blue. The mountains were brown and purple and a color I'd never named. I put my suitcase in the hotel room and walked out without sitting down, like I was afraid if I stopped, my old caution would catch up. I found a small diner on a side street with heat lamps and a counter racked in old turquoise tile. A man in a cowboy hat and a Pride pen took my order and brought me a breakfast burrito that felt heavy enough to need a prayer and didn't ask for one. I ate slowly and let the heat find my gums and thought maybe flavor was a way back into a life. "Traveling solo?" asked a voice to my left. The woman wore boots that walked more miles than her age suggested and silver rings on 3 fingers. Her hair was white, not from a bottle, and sailed to her shoulders like it still remembered being braids in a childhood photo somewhere. She smiled like a starter pistol at a fun run. "I'm learning to," I said. "Only kind that sticks," she answered, and we were queens of our stools for half an hour. Her name was Luann. She told me she took herself somewhere new every January because she used to keep all the holidays for her grown kids, and then one day she realized they were adults, and she was too, and she could claim a holiday for herself. She told me she sold her timeshare years ago when she realized it was a guilt machine disguised as a vacation. She said, "You think you owe it to the money you already spent, but the only thing you owe is to the future you're about to have." I thought of Jody's Tahoe timeshare and felt a sore relief. Some people need a committee to admit a mistake. Some of us only need to hear it from a stranger with a fork in her hand. The folk art market was a festival of color that made me giddy. I wandered tents and tables and watched a woman paint trini flowers on a clay sun with a brush so thin I had to squint to see it. I bought a small sun from my kitchen window. It cost $10 and felt like a proof of purchase for a life that had been waiting for me to find it. I bought a cheap scarf that didn't match a single thing I own, and that was the reason I wanted it. It matched the version of me who said yes to salsa samples without worrying about my blouse. At night, I walked back to the hotel and put my phone on Do Not Disturb like it was a spell. In the morning, I woke up without a residue of anyone else's request, and when I turned the phone face up out of habit, it was quiet. That silence felt almost musical, like the absence of a noise you didn't know you had learned to tune out. I didn't check Darren's messages. I imagined there were many. I didn't want my mind to go back to the old pattern of triage. I texted Maggie a picture of the clay sun, and she texted back a photo of her dog wearing a sweater and said, "Both of you in bright colors. I approve." We toured an adobe church with a white cross that made a cutout of the sky behind it. The guide told us about vigas and kivas, and I repeated the words under my breath like a little chant, because new vocabulary can be a way of making new room in your head. In the museum, I stood in front of a Georgia O'Keeffe painting of a white flower larger than life and thought how audacity and tenderness can live in the same thing. On the last night of the tour, the group sat in a hotel conference room with weak coffee and napkins that kept sticking to our wrists. The guide asked what the trip meant to us. People said the expected things. When it was my turn, I meant to speak politely, but a truth I hadn't rehearsed came out instead.
"This wasn't just a trip," I said, and my voice shook in the way of someone who doesn't cry often and has to make room when it arrives. It was a way out of a room I didn't know I'd locked myself in. My brother used my card for Aspen. I sent 4 words, "Find your own wallet," and I closed what needed closing and got on a plane because I didn't want to be the sad woman who told the story of being used for the rest of her life. I want to be the woman who tells the story of how she stopped. There was a silence that wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind that means people heard you, which is all we are ever asking. A woman from Wisconsin came up after and hugged me like we were cousins at a funeral and whispered, "I'm going home to close the account I cried over for a year." I nodded and thought maybe we collect each other's courage like stamps. When I got back to Columbus, snow had gathered in the seams alongside the curb. I dragged my suitcase up the steps and saw a shoebox on my doormat, no return address. I brought it inside and set it on the kitchen table and looked at it the way you look at a pot you're not sure is hot. The flaps were tucked, not taped. Inside, a stack of my own handwriting I recognized from old cards, birthday notes I'd written to Darren, Father's Day sentiments I'd slapped a stamp on and hoped would be ballast, Christmas messages with pine tree stickers, and at the bottom, a folded letter and a cashier's check. Len, the letter began, slopey handwriting that looked like a boy's project from school, and I could hear his voice trying to be smaller and failing. I've been angry because it's easier than sorry. Aspen was wrong. The card was wrong. I'm making payments. I got a second shift at the warehouse. I know saying sorry isn't payment. Consider this a start. I don't expect anything from you anymore except the truth. D. The cashier's check was for $1,500. I set it on the mantle, a little shrine to a complicated thing. I didn't cash it for weeks. I watched it like a stray animal on the porch, deciding if I was a safe place. Some Fridays after that, small envelopes arrived. $300, $250, $200, always in cash, no note. I kept receipts in a folder. I kept the boundary like a fence and learned a thing nobody tells you. Sometimes healing is paperwork. Jody's text stayed sharp a while. We had to sell the Tahoe timeshare. My boss thinks I'm distracted. The kids are upset. I hope you're happy. But they soften into weather reports. Selling the Tahoe timeshare had been what the lawyers call admission by statement, and I didn't need to pound a gavel at it. I let it be as season changing. CJ, who had grown tall in the years I wasn't looking, texted to ask if I would sit in the passenger seat of his mom's Tahoe in the Kroger parking lot and let him practice backing into a parking space because I was patient and she was not. He added, "No pressure if weird." I wrote back that I would bring bottled waters and the good mints. Jody rolled up 15 minutes late, waved from behind the wheel and said, "He's all yours," with a tiredness that read as relief. CJ did fine. We practiced until dusk, and he laughed once the way boys do when they know you see them, and it's a pleasant knowing. Life tilted small in other ways, too. I went to line dancing on Tuesdays and learned to laugh every time my foot went left when the room went right. The teacher, a woman with pink sneakers and knees that must have made a pact with God, clapped for me so hard my ears went red. On Thursdays, I stumbled into the quilting guild because Maggie said, "You can sew a straight line emotionally, if not literally." The women there understood the way imperfection can be a feature. We stitched for an hour and unstitched for 20 minutes because sometimes that's the ratio. I volunteered at the public library Storytime where toddlers put their sticky hands in mine and did not know or care about my family's accounting. They cared if I could make the right animal noise, which I could. I bought a used blue kayak off Facebook Marketplace that had sated circles where the previous owner's stickers had been. On mornings when the geese were in a good mood, I learned the easy loop at Hover Reservoir and let myself glide at a speed that made room for my breath. One afternoon, I took the scarf from Santa Fe and draped it over Tom's chair. I don't believe in objects holding power, not really. But I believe in telling yourself the truth and leaving reminders where you can't avoid them. The scarf said, "You did this without asking permission from a committee that never voted yes to anything but their own needs." The scarf said, "Leave it there. It looks right." A thing I didn't expect. Sometimes the old fear returned like a draft under a door. At the lowest moments, I caught myself thinking I should apologize to Darren for making things harder, like I hadn't just unbroken my own life. I would stand at the sink and say out loud, "Help that costs your dignity is too expensive," until my voice turned into something sturdier than breath. I taped that sentence on the fridge one day in a moment of grandiosity and then tore it down, because I don't need a poster. I need a habit.
In spring, the county fair came to the fairgrounds with the rides that clank and the lemonade and plastic cups with lemon slices you can spear with a straw. I went because there was nothing else to do that night and because sometimes you need to watch a goat contest. The air smelled like hay and sugar. A woman my age stopped me by the baked goods tent and said, "Are you Lena Whitaker?" in a voice that made my name sound like we'd met on a bus 40 years ago and promised to keep in touch. I nodded, wary. She said, "I was at the St. Rita's clinic that day. I listened when you told the volunteer you closed the account and didn't apologize. I went home and did the same. I slept for the first time in months." We cried in that small, dry way women do in public when we don't want runny noses. We hugged like the fair was a city that belonged to us.
Darren and I met for coffee twice after that, always in the same chain place with long tables that made private conversation impossible. I didn't discuss the past. I didn't offer the future as a blank check. I asked him about his job. He told me how his manager had started doing surprise audits on my warehouse and how most of the guys hated it until they realized fewer mistakes meant fewer losses and better bonuses. He told me that CJ had made varsity and that Brooklyn was singing and that Jody had taken on a side job doing social media for a boutique and was good at it because she already posted like it was a job. He told me he'd started using an app that rounds up purchases and puts the change in a savings account. And I tried not to laugh at the smaller version of the thing he hadn't learned to do when it mattered most, because small is where most humans actually walk. He didn't ask for money at either coffee, which felt like being at a holiday without the napkins. One Saturday in early summer, Maggie and I drove 2 counties over for a line dancing workshop because she heard there would be a special guest instructor who had once been a backup dancer for a country star I can never remember. We missed our exit and ended up at a diner with orange booths and real pie. We ordered coconut cream and left with our mouths thick with happiness. "You know," she said, as we drove back with the windows cracked and the bad radio station playing, "you've been practicing a hard sentence out loud. Time to practice a better one." "What's that?" "I love my life," she said. Calm, like a person reporting the weather. "Say it and see if you believe yourself yet." I looked out at Ohio fields that rolled like bread and said it. I love my life. It came out clumsy, like a shoe I wasn't sure fit. I said it again until it sounded like it belonged to me. It didn't feel like bragging. It felt like something I had bought with installments and finally owned. The call from Darren a month later was short and flat. "Lynn, I'm filing our taxes late because of the mess. I want you to know I'm not putting you on anything. I shouldn't have done that before. I'm not doing it now." "Okay," I said. "And," he said. And I heard the thump of a ball against a garage door in his end, and a kid's voice that sounded like CJ 15 years ago and a recent Tuesday. "I'll have another envelope for you next week. Not much, but something. Mail it." We didn't say we loved each other because sometimes love doesn't fit that easily. We said goodbye. In August, Brooklyn turned 16 and invited me to her choir concert. I sat in the middle of a school auditorium that smelled of leather and old dust and the kind of sweat that dries in practice. She stood in the second row and sang like she'd learned air was for borrowing, not hoarding. Afterward, she hugged me tight and said, "Grandma, your scarf is loud and I like it." I laughed, the laugh that came and went, and this time, it stayed. There are days when the loneliness sits upright on the couch and pats the cushion next to it, and I sit down because it's polite to acknowledge your guests. On those days, I put on my shoes and walk to the library or the reservoir, or even just the corner where the maple leaves dip down like they want to hear a secret, and I say the sentence again. Help that costs your dignity is too expensive. I say the other sentence too. I love my life.
And then I go home and make something for dinner that feeds the part of me that it's nobody's emergency. Fall came early this year, swifter than memory, with wind that hummed at the eaves. I raked leaves into a pile and thought of being little and how Darren would jump and I would smooth the edges of the hill with my hands. I thought of everything we had done for each other that had nothing to do with money and gotten jumbled in our middle years. I bagged up the leaves and tied the knots tight the way you do when you learn from your father that a thing worth doing is worth finishing. At the grocery store, at the pharmacy, at the church rummage sale, people asked about Aspen because Columbus is a city that holds a rumor like a sweater you can't believe someone donated. I said, we figured it out. I didn't say how. Women nodded because they understood quiet wins. Men nodded because they believed in the economy of words. The cashier slid my change across the counter. We did fine without anyone needing to know what had purchased the piece. When the anniversary of Tom's death came around, I did the thing I'm done since he left. Wrote him a letter on my best paper and tucked it under the Santa Fe scarf on the chair. Some years I tell him how mad I still am at his body for forgetting me. This year, I told him I am okay. Not the kind of okay that says, please stop asking. The kind that is boring and solid and sits on the back porch at dusk and listens for owls. I wrote, I used to think I was strong because I could hold things. Now I think I might be strong because I can put them down. I signed my name the way he liked it, neat and all in one line, and went to bed. I woke before my alarm, and for a moment, I forgot I had ever said yes to a life that didn't want me in it, except as a wallet or a wall. Then I remembered, and the remembering didn't hurt. It felt like checking the locks out of habit and finding them already secure. If you're listening to this and you are where I was, here is the only instruction I can give you. You don't need a sermon. You need a sentence. Mine was, find your own wallet. Yours might be, that won't work for me, or no more, or not this time. Say it to the air until it becomes yours. Then make it boring. Close the account, cut the card, change the passwords, freeze the credit. Tell 2 people who will clap when you waver. Then take your small life in your hands like it's a bird you thought was dead and watch it blink. Buy a scarf that doesn't match. Go to a line dancing class where your feet get it wrong and your heart gets it right. Eat something hot enough to make your eyes water. Sit in a courthouse and say, I need a list. And listen when they give you the fences you can build without hating anyone. You do not have to hate anyone to save your life. You do not have to explain the way your pain fits in your purse. You do not have to be the woman who tells the story of being used for 20 years because it is the only story you remembered. You can be the woman who learned a new one at 68 and lets it include waffles if she wants. I didn't lose money. I bought a lock for my peace and a ticket to my own life. If that sounds dramatic, so be it. Drama is what people call life when you stop apologizing for having one. Tell me where you are, what diner you go to, what song your line dancing class likes best. I'll raise a mug towards your first no, and we can be the kind of family strangers become when they teach each other how to leave a room and still wave from the porch. If anyone asks for a moral, I'll give them the shortest version I know. Help that costs your dignity is too expensive. And if you need 4 words to start, the kind you can fit on a breath and send without trembling, borrow mine until you write your own. Find your own wallet.